All right, everybody, welcome to the sixth and final part of the Reddit build. My name is Shadi, and if you are new here, please check out part one. It'll be somewhere available at the top of the screen. Also, I have created a Discord server for you to join to get help with the project or really ask about anything. So please join that. The link is in the description, and I would love to see you in there. All right, so last video, we covered an incredible amount. We pretty much finished up all of the functionality of our entire app. We are now able to create communities, join and leave communities, post in those communities, vote on posts in communities, comment on posts, delete the posts, and delete the comments. So I'm anticipating this part to be a lot shorter and more straightforward than the last parts. We have already done a lot of the heavy lifting, and all that is left is just wrapping up a few loose ends and just building out our homepage, which is just going to mostly consist of dropping in components and functions that we have already written, and we'll just need to write out a few new functions and components. Once we're done that, we will quickly cover deployment so that we can get this thing into production for you guys, so you have a completed project and you will have something to show off. So we are very, very close to being completely done. Thank you all so much for joining this journey with me, and let's get it done. All right, you guys. So as I just mentioned, we are going to be working on the home page of our app here because we have already covered all of the community-based functionality. And all we need to do now is work on the index page of the app. And we basically just have a post feed very similar to the communities, and then these right-hand side supporting components here, like the top communities, and then these other sort of simple components here. All right, so since on the homepage, we are not in any particular community, we just need to write a few functions to actually build out the posts that will be inside of the user's feed. Because when we go into a community, that query is very simple. We just go find all the posts with the community ID that we are currently in. But on the home feed, we sort of need to write some different logic to actually determine what we're going to show to the user. And we want to do this for both logged in users and users that are not logged in, meaning that they're sort of visiting the site for the first time. So if I log out, you'll see that the feed changes and it's slightly different. And then if I were to log back in, it builds a feed that is specific to this particular user. So we just have to write two functions, one to build the feed for a logged in user and one to build the feed for a non-logged in user. And our functions are going to be very simplified versions of what Reddit probably does to build out the user's feed. They probably have very, very advanced backend functions that use machine learning and everything to actually determine what to show to the user. In our case, we're just going to be writing some simple functions. So we're not going to get into any sort of machine learning or anything. So our functions that build out our feed are going to be much simpler than what Reddit probably uses. And our homepage, just like every other page we've seen, follows the same exact layout pattern with the left-hand side or right-hand side. So we can, again, use our page content layout component and then just drop the components in there and it'll style it all very nicely, just like the other pages. All right, so let's actually go to our app and go to our own homepage here, which should be just completely blank because we have not written really anything inside of here. And the file we're going to be working in here is just going to be our index page. So if we go into pages, it's the root of the entire app. This is where all of the initial Next.js page stuff went. We have not touched this file since way back in part one when we sort of just deleted everything inside of it. So now we're going to actually fill this thing up and put some meaningful content in here. All right, so I'm going to close my directory here and let's start with the actual HTML layout of this component. So as I just mentioned, we are again going to be able to use our page content layout component that we have created, and we can just create the two empty fragments in here. All right, so in the first fragment, we are going to have our actual post feed. And then in this left-hand side container, we are going to have our recommendations and those other two very simple components in the right-hand side here. All right, so that's sort of the skeleton for our HTML. Let's work on the skeleton of the functional part of this component. So the first function we're going to have is going to be called build user home feed. And this is going to be responsible for building out the feed for an authenticated user that is logged in. The second function we're going to have is going to be called build no user home feed. And pretty self-explanatory. This is going to be for users who are not logged in. And our third function is going to be called get user post votes. And this is only going to be called for authenticated users. And if you remember, the way we got our votes when we were inside of a community was that we got all of the votes for posts within that community. But since on the homepage, we are not in a community, we're going to get the votes that may possibly exist for the posts that do end up showing up in our feed, depending on what this build user home feed function ends up putting into our post state. And this function is a very minor detail on the homepage because if you think about the homepage of really any application like Reddit or Twitter or Facebook, when you refresh your homepage, you're typically seeing content you haven't seen before. It's new. So you probably would not have voted on it. But there is a chance, especially in our demo, we don't have a ton of user-generated data like on Facebook and Twitter. So it just makes sense to have this function here to sort of just cover the bases to make it actually make sense in case a post is in the feed that we have previously voted on. So that is sort of how this is going to work. But we'll cover a lot more on that when we get to it. So don't worry about this for now. And beneath these functions, there's going to be a few use effects that we're going to have to create to actually sort of manage the logic and the data flow and govern how these functions are actually called, depending on if there's a user logged in and depending on other state in our application. So the most important thing on our homepage is whether or not we actually have a user logged in. That really drives how our feed is built and what functions we need to call here. So the first thing I'm going to bring in is going to be our user object from our useAuthState function. I'm going to pass this our auth instance from client app. And we're also going to bring in the loading parameter returned from our useAuthState hook, which we're going to call loading user. And this is going to help us in our use effect logic to know which one of these functions to call. And this will become more clear when we actually start writing them out. All right, so now that we actually have our user object, let's write out our use effects and see how they are going to interact with the user object and the loading user parameter to actually determine what functions we're going to call. So our first use effect is going to have the dependencies of user as well as loading user. All right, so inside of this use effect, we basically want to know if the user is logged in or not, and if the auth service has attempted to try to get the authenticated user, because there is a delay there. As soon as we boot up our application, there might be an authenticated user that was logged in previously from like a previous session, or the user might be logging back in or sign up. But the auth service has to go and actually get that from the Firebase servers. And while it is attempting to fetch the authenticated user, the user is null. And that is the purpose of this loading user state. It starts off as true, and then it goes and attempts to fetch a user. And then when it comes back, either with or without a user, it's going to set loading user to be false. It's like, oh, okay, I tried to go get it, and there either is one or there isn't one. And if there is one, this will be a truthy value. And if there is not one, this will be a falsy value. So if we just wrote an if statement like this, like saying, if there's no user, then build the no user home feed, that actually would not work because, like I said before, when the application is initialized and the person actually navigates to our website, this is always going to be undefined or null or some falsy value at first, while the useAuthState hook attempts to fetch that user from our auth service. So at first, we're always not going to have a user, but that doesn't mean there isn't going to be one that is returned from the useAuthState hook. And so that's why this wouldn't work, because we can't just assume that no user initially means that we should build the no user home feed. We need to know that the auth service actually attempted to fetch the user. And then if it did attempt to fetch one and there still isn't one, then we want to build the no user home feed. So I hope that makes sense. So what we can do to actually implement this is to say, if there is no user and we are no longer attempting to fetch the user, then build the no user home feed. That means that the auth service tried to get the authenticated user and there was not one. And we should build our feed for a non-authenticated user. So there is another use effect that we are going to write in a bit that is going to tell us if we need to call the build user home feed function as well as the get user post votes function. But we are going to work on the no user home feed first, and then we will circle back to the actual user home feed. All right, so let's start writing out the logic for our no user home feed. So what I'm going to do is at the very top here, just below our user here, I'm going to create some loading states so that we can actually use our post loader again, very similar to how we use it inside of the community page. And I'm going to set it equal to false to start off. And inside of our build no user home feed function, I'm going to create a try catch block. And the very first thing we're going to do at the top is set loading to be true. And then at the end, we can set loading to be false, just like this. And we can log our error, build no user home feed error. So our very simple no user home feed algorithm is just going to be simply grabbing the 10 most popular posts in our database. And a really good feature to add in your app would be pagination so that you could, load 10 initially. And then if the user keeps scrolling, it would load another 10 so that it keeps your front end nice and light. So you don't just fetch all of the posts from the database. You can start off with 10. Pagination is really good for front end optimization, and it just ensures you're not fetching too much data. In our case, we're just going to create a simple query that grabs the 10 most popular posts in our database. And the way we can do that is by querying our post collection and ordering them by the vote status. So to do this, we can create our post query object, which is going to be created using the query function from Firestore. The first argument this requires is a collection reference to the collection we are querying. So import collection from Firestore. Pass it our Firestore instance from client app. The collection we are querying is posts. So after our collection reference, we can pass in some query specifications to tell Firestore what exactly we want from this collection reference. So we want to grab documents from our post collection, but we want to order them by the vote status. So we can bring in our order by function from Firestore, and the key that we're ordering by is vote status. That's the name of the field on our posts. And we can pass in a second argument of descending because we want the highest rated at the top. Okay, and as a third argument, we can pass in another query specification. And in our case, we're going to pass in a limit. So you can bring in the limit function from Firestore, and you can pass it 10, just like this. So this query is going to get 10 posts from the post collection that are ordered by vote status in descending order so that the highest rated is at the top. So now we can actually get these documents from Firestore by passing our post query to our getDocs function. So we can say post docs is equal to await get docs. And in order to use the await keyword, we do need to make this function asynchronous. So let's do that. And then we pass in our post query to this function here. And as usual, we can create another array called posts and extract all of the data from each of the post documents inside of post docs. So we can say postdocs.docs.map, take each one and turn it into an object with an ID of doc.id, and spread all of the data inside of the document to extract it all out. Now, in order to put these posts into our post state, we are going to need to grab our set post state function from Recoil. So we can grab that value from our use post custom hook because we're going to grab a bunch of other stuff from this hook as well. So we might as well grab the state from here too. So for now, we can grab our set post state value function returned by our hook, come down here and take the post array that we just created and call set post state value. And we want to update this to contain those posts. And we can tell TypeScript that this is going to be an array of posts. We can say posts is going to be equal to posts as an array of posts. So make sure the post type imports from post atom. That is a lot of saying posts. It's kind of a tongue twister after a while. So now we have successfully retrieved posts from the database and put them into our post state. Now all we need to do is actually show them here in our feed. So we're going to do something extremely similar to what we did in our post component. If we go back to this component here, all we did was take our post state and map through them, and for each one, create a post item. And we're going to do the exact same thing here. It's actually going to look exactly the same as this, even with the post loader. So let's go back to our index page, and we can remove this comment. And inside of our left fragment here, we can put the same ternary operator that we had in that post component. So we can say, are we loading the post right now? So if loading is true, we want to show our post loader, which we can import. And if it is false and we are not loading, we want to map through all of those posts inside of post state and return a post item for each one. Okay, so we're actually going to need our post state value from our hook as well. So let's come back up here and just grab that post state value. Then we can come down here and we actually are going to wrap all of our posts in a stack to space them out nicely. So import stack from Chakra. And inside of our stack, we are going to say post state value .posts.map, take each post, and for each one, we want to create a post item component just like this. And actually, if you remember from our last part, we also want our create post link on the homepage as well, which is what triggers the opening of our directory. So let's put this at the top of our fragment here, above our stack. So we can say create post link. And if we save this, we should see the create post link unless we get an error. We're not seeing post because the post item thing is broken and we're not even calling that function yet. But we can see the create post link, which is perfect. So our post item component, if you remember, requires all of those functions like on vote and on delete and on select. So let's go back up to our use post hook and grab all of those. So we're going to grab on select post, on delete post, and on vote. Okay. So let's come back to our post item and pass all these in as props. So our first prop can be a key, which is going to be our post.id. Second one can be the post itself. Post is equal to post. Third one can be our on select post function. On select post is equal to on select post. pass on delete post. We can pass on vote. We can pass in our user vote value. And if you remember, this is where we're going to check if a vote for this particular post exists in the user post vote state. So we can say post state value dot post votes dot find, and we want to iterate through all of these votes and see if one has a post ID that is equal to this current post that we're iterating through's ID, just like this. Okay, let's scroll down here. And if we can find a vote, then we just want to grab the vote value from that vote. Okay, we're going to pass another prop called user is creator to know if we are the author of this post. So we can say, does the user ID equal to this post's creator ID? And the last prop we are going to add is going to be a Boolean called homepage to tell this component whether or not we are currently on the home page. And this is from a while ago, but let's go back to our post item. And if you remember, I briefly touched on that here. I had this comment saying homepage check, and that is so that we can display the community name and the image URL here if we're on the homepage. Because if we're inside of the community, we do not show that because we don't really need to, because we're inside of that community, so we don't need to display what community it is. But on the homepage, we do want to show that so that the user can actually click on it and see what community it's in. So inside of our post item here, we can come to the top, and on our post item props type, we can add an optional Boolean prop here that is going to be passed if we are indeed on the homepage. So then we come down to our component here and grab that from the props from destructuring. Then on our index page, we should now actually be able to pass this in just like this. And just by simply passing it in, it is going to be true. Perfect. And this is actually it for our entire left-hand side fragment. So I can save this. And all we need to do now, let's go back to our app here, is just have it actually call this function. So if I log out, let's see what happens. It actually called the function and it went and got those 10 posts from the database. Now our database only has one post, so it's going to get up to 10. Yeah, there's only one post, but it would get 10 if there were 10. And like I said before, after we finish the no user case, we're going to write out the logic to actually build the feed for what happens when I log in and there actually is a user. But now this is pretty cool because we can actually see some posts on our feed and they appear exactly the same as they do in a community. It's just a more generic feed. So now let's go into our post item component and quickly write out that new logic for checking if we are on the homepage and display the community image URL and the link to that community if we are indeed on the homepage. So just underneath this comment here, we can add some logic to check if we are on the homepage. So we can say homepage and then write the double ampersand sign to say if we are on the homepage, we want to display this additional information that we're going to write here. So I'm going to create a fragment inside of here. So now if I just put a div in here that says homepage just to test this out, if I save this, we should see that here. So let's get rid of this div. And inside of here, we're going to add a ternary operator to check for the existence of the community image URL. And if it exists, we're going to display it. And if it does not, we're going to show our generic Reddit icon. This is our classic image icon ternary operator. So you can say, does the post contain an image URL? If it does, let's show that image. So we can use our image component from Chakra. And if we do not have an image, let's show our classic Reddit icon. So icon, and then we can say as FA Reddit icon. So this icon, we're going to give a font size of 18 point and a margin right of 1, as well as a color of blue 500. Okay, so on our image component, we want to make the source equal to that post.community image URL. And we actually have not added this parameter to our post yet in our new post form, but we're going to go do that in just a second. It's a single line addition. We want to make the border radius of this equal to full to make it round, and we want the box size to be equal to 18 pixels. And we're going to give this a margin right of 2, just like this. So underneath this ternary operator here, now we're going to actually add the link to that community. So we can bring in our link component from next link, and we want to give this an href value of the page that we want to go to when we click on this thing. And that is going to be r/, then we want to pass the post.community ID. Okay, inside of our link, we're going to have some text. We can add some curly brackets because the text we want to display inside of here is going to be r/, then the postdoc community ID. Okay, so if I save this, now we can actually see that link in there. Let's add some styling here. So we're going to make the font weight of this text heavier. So we're going to make it 7. And we're also going to give it some hover styling to make it appear as if it's a link, because it is. And links usually have a underlined text decoration. So we can say text decoration, and we can give this an underline value here, just like that. And to create some space between this link as well as the posted by username text, rather than just adding some margin, we're going to add this little dot icon here, because that's how Reddit has it, and it looks really nice. Okay, so just underneath this link here, we can create another icon, but this icon is going to be the value BS dot. So make sure that imports, and we're going to give this a color of gray 500 and a font size of 8. So it's very small and very subtle, but it does give some spacing there, and I think it looks really good. So now I can actually click on this link and it'll take us to this community. So let's watch. So it took us to the community, but just for a second there, it actually took us to the single post page view. So if I go back, the first route that it went to was the single post page view, and then it went to the community page. And this again has to do with event propagation. Because we have an onClick on the post item here that takes us to the single post page, we do need to do some event propagation to prevent us from triggering that when we click on the link inside of the post item. So what we can do is just add a simple onClick to our text here. And we can just simply take the click event that is generated and call the event.stop propagation function on it. And so now if I were to save that, if I click on this link now, it will take us directly to the community page. It is not going to first go to the single post page view and then the community page. So now if I go back, the previous route is the home page, not the single post page. And now we just need to go back and quickly add the community image URL to our new post documents if it exists. Because Shadi's group, if I go into here, does have a custom community image, and we need that to be inserted onto the post as well, and we are currently not doing that. Very simple to fix. We can just go to our new post form file. So in order to insert this on this new post object, we do need access to that value. So what we're going to do is add the community image URL as a prop to our new post form. So if we go back to where this new post form is actually rendered, it is on the submit page. We can see that the new post form is here, and we have the community state value inside of this file. So what we're going to do is pass this as a prop to our new post form. So we can say community image URL, and this is going to be equal to community state value dot current community dot image URL, just like that. Then inside of our new post form, we have to actually add that to our prop type here. Okay, so underneath our user, we can add community image URL, and we're going to make this optional because if it does not exist on the current community, the value of it is going to be undefined. So we need to tell TypeScript that it's going to be either undefined or a string. Okay, so now we can grab that from our destructured props here, community image URL, and on our new post object, underneath the community ID, we can add community image URL, and we want to make it the value of community image URL, or if it does not exist and it is undefined, we're going to pass an empty string. And the reason we're doing that is because Firebase will not like it if we pass a value of undefined here. We need to pass in an empty string instead. They're both falsy values, but Firebase just wouldn't like the value of undefined. It is happy though with an empty string. So the value of community image URL is going to be this variable if it exists, and if it is not, we're passing an empty string. So now if I were to save this, and inside of Shadi's group, create a new post. Oh, I have to log in. Let's log back in as Shad Merhi. Oh, forget my password. Okay, so if I go to create post and I call it community image feature, and I can say newest feature. Okay, and if I post this and go back to the home page, we should see the community image URL in this post because it was inserted. This post, however, does not contain it because this feature we did not have when we created this post. And actually, if I go into Shadi's group and I change the image to something else, like the Google logo here, and I save that, if I went back to the home page and were to refresh, the post should have the latest community image, and I'd have to log out to see that because our feed is only built for logged out users, and you can see that the Google image is indeed there. So we can close this new post form, we can close the submit page, and we can come back to our index page here. Now let's start working on the actual logic for building out the user feed for our authenticated users. Okay, so for users that are logged in, we are going to show them posts from the communities that they have actually joined. And we know all of the users' communities thanks to our community snippet state inside of community state value. So what we can do is build some sort of query that is going to grab a set of posts from the various communities that the user is in. So the main thing that this function needs to accomplish is to get posts from the user's communities. Okay, so let's create a try catch block and log the error if it occurs. Build user home feed error. Okay, then at the very top here, we're going to set our loading state to be true. And at the very bottom, set loading state to be false. Okay. So the way we can write our query such that it fetches posts from multiple communities rather than just one is we can create an array of the user's community IDs using the community snippets, and we can write a where clause in our query to find post documents with the community ID that is inside of that array. So since we are going to be fetching posts from specific communities, we do want to make sure that the user has indeed joined some communities. So we can write an if statement to check for the length of the community snippets array. So we can say if community state value dot my snippets dot length, meaning that there are indeed communities that this user has joined, then we are going to get posts from the user's communities. And if the user has not joined any communities, meaning that they're like a new user or they just haven't joined anything yet, we're just going to call our build no user home feed function because that's going to build them a nice generic feed. So we're going to need to create an array of the user's community IDs because it's going to be required by the query we're going to write. And we can do that using their community snippets. So we can create this array and we can call it my community IDs. And what we want to do is basically extract the ID from all of the user's snippets. So we can take the community state value dot my snippets and map through them. And for each snippet, we want to sort of convert it into just the community ID. So we're basically just converting the full snippet object to just a single string that is the snippet.community ID. So my community IDs is just going to be an array of all of the extracted community IDs from all of the snippets. And we're going to use this in our post query, which we can create right now. So we're going to say const post query, and we can use our query function again. First argument is going to be our collection, which is going to take our Firestore instance. Collection name is posts. So the second argument to our query function is going to be our where clause, and this is where we're going to actually use that community ID array. So we want to get posts where the community ID of the post is in the my community IDs array. And this is how we can write that using this where function from Firestore. So this is going to find all of the posts where the post community ID is inside of the my communities ID array that we just created. And we're also going to set a limit on this so that we don't fetch like hundreds of posts if they exist. So we're going to set a limit of 10. And again, this is a very simple query to build out the user home feed. A really good thing you could build on top of this app would be to make the actual feed functions a lot more sophisticated. This works though for the purpose of this demo. Then we can actually fetch these documents from Firestore. So we can say const post docs is equal to await get docs and pass it our post query. Then we can create our posts array and map through all of the post docs.docs, take each document and convert it into an object with the ID of doc.id and with the data inside of the document. Okay, then we can just call our set post state value function and actually put these posts inside of our post state. So we want to update posts to be posts as an array of posts, very similar to what we did in the no user home feed function. Okay, so just to reiterate, we are checking if the user is inside of any communities. If they are, we're going to go get some posts that are inside of those communities. And if they are not in any communities, we're just going to call the no user home feed function that's going to build them the generic feed that is not specific to any community. Okay, so now that this function has been written, we do need a way to call it. And the way we're going to do that is going to be with another use effect that is going to run some logic and check if it is appropriate to call that function, very similar to what we did with our build no user home feed function down here. So we can create another use effect here. Okay, so just like this use effect down here, that is listening to some application state and then waiting to read those values to see if they match some condition that it makes it appropriate to call the build no user home feed function. We're going to do something extremely similar inside of here as well. We want to basically know when we should call our build user home feed function. Now, if we look at this function, we can see that it is fetching data based on the values inside of community state value dot my snippets, meaning that this function and the posts that we want to retrieve in this function depend on this state here, community state value dot my snippets. So we don't really want to call this function until we have fetched those snippets from the database. So that is what we're going to do down here in this use effect. We're going to check and see, has our application attempted to fetch the user snippets from the database? If it has, then let's go call that function. So as a result, this use effect is going to have a dependency of community state value dot my snippets, because we want to listen for changes in this value here, because it's initialized as an empty array, and then our app goes and gets them from the database, and then it puts that data inside of this state. So we want to know when these updates occur. But there's a slight problem here. We saw that in our function, build user home feed, that we check for a length of the array. And if there is a length, meaning that the user is inside of communities, we go and get posts for those communities. And if they are not in any communities, meaning that that array is empty, we just build them the generic feed. But we need a way to know that our app has attempted to try and fetch the snippets, because it's just simply checking for the length of the snippets. So if we were to say something like if community state value dot my snippets dot length, and then in this case, we would call build user home feed. This doesn't actually work, because what if the user has not joined any communities? Like, the database could attempt to go get those community snippets, but there could be none because it's like a new user or they just haven't joined anything yet, meaning that this would be false, meaning that this would not get called. So simply just checking the length of the community snippets is not enough information to know whether or not we should call this function. We need some other piece of state. Similar to how down here, just checking the truthiness of the user was not enough. We needed to look at this loading state to see, has our use auth state hook attempted to fetch the user? And the solution to this is basically creating something similar to this loading user state on our community state value. So all we need to do is add some sort of parameter to our community state value that is going to change once our application has indeed tried to fetch the snippets from the database. Only after it has tried to fetch these from the database and put them in state, we will call this build user home feed function. And in this use effect here, we actually do not need to worry about checking for the existence of a user. And the reason is because if you go to our use community data hook, the use effect that's responsible for fetching the snippets in the first place already depends on the user, and it's only going to go and get the snippets for that user if the user exists, meaning that this use effect over here inside of our index page implicitly depends on the user, so we don't have to explicitly define it here, because the way we're going to write this use effect is going to make it impossible for it to even trigger before this one has actually finished. So all we need to do is go into our communities atom here and add some piece of state that is going to tell us if we have attempted to fetch the community snippets in the first place. So all we need to do is on our community state interface here, we can add a parameter called snippets fetched, which is going to be a Boolean that is going to be initialized as false, because as soon as the application loads, we have not fetched the snippets. And once the snippets have been fetched for the first time, this is going to be set equal to true. And then that is the variable we can listen to inside of our index page here. Have the snippets been fetched? Oh, okay, they have. Let's go build out the user home feed then. Let's go back to our communities atom. And inside of our default community state, we're going to initialize this value to be false. Now, back in our index page over here, we are going to change this dependency from my snippets to be that snippets fetched Boolean parameter. And then in this use effect, we're going to say, if my community state.snippets fetched is true, then go build out the user home feed, because then it is appropriate to do that. And then inside of our build user home feed function, it would make sense to check for the length of that array to see if the user has joined any communities or not. So the only thing missing now is to actually set this thing equal to true inside of our fetch snippet function. So inside of use community data, inside of the get my snippets function, right up here, as soon as we fetch these snippets from the database for the first time, we can just update the value of snippets fetched to be true. Okay, so the data flow is like this. The user is going to log in, which is going to trigger the getMySnippets function to happen. The getMySnippets function is going to fetch the snippets from the database, and it is going to put them in state, and is going to set the snippets fetch parameter to be true. Then inside of our use effect over here on our index page, this use effect is listening to changes on that snippets fetch thing. When this is changed to true, this use effect is going to trigger. This if statement is going to be triggered because it is true, and then is going to call the build user home feed function and build out the appropriate user home feed. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And this is a very common thing in React to have your use effects listen to certain pieces of state and wait for that data to come in before triggering other things. And it's sort of this nice data flow logic. And it just makes sure all of the data that your functions depend on actually exists, or at least has been attempted to have been fetched. So now when I actually log in, it should go and fetch the snippets for shadmary@gmail.com, which should trigger this build user home feed function, and a new feed should be built. So let's test it out. So sign in. Okay, nothing happened. Okay, my snippets are not even being fetched. Okay, so there's definitely a user because I'm logged in. Oh, okay, you think it? Okay, so I think what's happening currently is that if we go to our use community data hook, this use effect that is down here that is supposed to call getMySnippets, which is listening to the user object, is actually not even happening because we're currently not calling this hook from our index page. We need to call this hook in order to trigger these use effects here. So the way we can do that is instead of pulling in community state value using the use recoil value hook, we can actually grab it from our use community data hook. So use community data, import that, and we can grab community state value, and it's going to return the exact same value that Recoil did because this hook is, after all, just grabbing from Recoil. But we are now going to actually trigger the hook to call those use effects that we need it to. So now if I save this, okay, so it did rebuild a feed. There's only 2 posts in our entire database, and there's only 1 community. I'm going to need to create some more posts in different communities that I'm not in to test this out. But if I log out, it should, it rebuilds the feed for a non-authenticated user. And also, when the user logs out and there is no user anymore, we want to actually reset the value of that snippets fetched Boolean. And we can do that inside of this use effect here as well, because we're already kind of doing that. When there is no user, we clear the mySnippet state because it is specific to a particular user. So if the user logs out, we just empty that array. We can do the same thing with the snippets fetch thing here. And this ensures that if a user does happen to log out and the feed is rebuilt for a non-authenticated user, and then they do decide to log back in, it will trigger another update to rebuild the feed for that user again. So now if I save this, if I log out, it rebuilds the non-user feed. And if I log back in as Shadi, it builds the feed for Shadi. Okay, and both of the user and non-user feeds look exactly the same right now because our database only has 2 posts in them. And so to actually differentiate the 2 feeds here, let's go back into that new community, or go into some other community that you have created. And I'm going to create a post in here. New, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to post this inside of here. Okay, then what I'm going to do is come to my homepage. So, okay, we can see that this is in my home feed because I am in new. So let's log out. So I see the same feed, right? Let's log back in, and I should see the same feed, just in a different order. Shadman. Cool, okay, but now what I'm going to do is go into new and leave this community. And now if I go back home, I can see that the post is no longer in my feed because I am no longer in new. If I log out though, it rebuilds the feed and that post is in my feed. So now we can actually see the difference between a user and a non-user feed. If I log back in, it rebuilds the feed with only posts from the communities that I am in. And I actually realized there is some missing logic inside of our create community modal that I forgot to add after we actually created the community page, because we want to actually create the community and then be rerouted to that community page. And currently it's not doing that. It's just creating the community and it just stays with the modal open. And so to fix that, all we have to do is go back to our create community modal, which we haven't seen in a long time. So inside of our handle create community function, And so after our transaction runs and our community is successfully created, we want to route the user to that page, and we can do that using our router from Next.js. So let's come up to the top here, and just beneath our loading state here, let's bring that in. Const router is equal to use router. Okay. Then underneath our transactions, inside of our try block, we can call router.push, and we want to push this user to the route of r / and then community name. And that is the name that they entered inside of the input in the modal. And we actually want to close the community modal, and we can do that with our already existing handle close function. Okay, and one more simple thing we can do is just close our community directory here. And we can do that with our already existing toggle menu open function from our use directory hook. So just underneath our router, we can call that hook use directory, and we want to bring in the toggle menu open function. Then just after the handle close function, we can call toggle menu open. Okay, so now if I create a community and it is successfully created, it should close the modal, it should close the directory, and it should route me to that new community page. So let's give this a go. Let's do create community, and let's call this Tesla Motors. Create community. Perfect. Okay, so Tesla Motors was created. It brought me to the Tesla Motors page, and the directory closed, and now I can see Tesla Motors inside of my community snippets, and that is exactly what we wanted to do. Okay, so let's go back to our home page, and we can close our create community modal. Okay, so let's go back to our index page here, and we are now done with the build no user home feed function as well as the build user home feed function. And the last thing we need to do is just write this simple function to get the post votes for the posts that end up appearing in our feed. And because post votes depend on a user being logged in, this is only going to run if the user is indeed logged in. So we're going to create a third use effect that's going to run some logic to check whether or not we should run our get user post votes function. Okay, so there are two important pieces of state that we need to listen to before we know if we should run our get user post votes function. And the first one is going to be our user, and our second one is going to be our post state value dot posts, because we want to wait until there are actually posts in that array before we go and try to get votes for posts. So we need both the user as well as actual posts in the feed to exist before it actually makes sense to even call the get user post votes function. Okay, so then inside of here, we can just write a single if statement to say if user and post state value dot posts dot length, then call the get user post votes function, because we have both of the things required by that function. Okay, then for this function here, we need to make this asynchronous because it's going to be fetching data from the database, and we can create a try catch block and log the error if it occurs. Get user post votes error. And so what we want to do is query our user's post votes subcollection and try to find the votes with a post ID that matches any of the possible posts inside of post state value. And so to do this, we can write a similar query like we wrote up here in our post query. In this one, we are finding all of the posts with a community ID that is inside of this My Community IDs array. Down here, we're going to be finding all of the votes with a post ID that is inside of a post ID array that we're going to create. So let's create that array, and we'll call it post IDs, and this is going to be equal to post state value dot posts, and we're going to map each of these posts into just a post ID string. So now post IDs is just going to be an array of string IDs. Then we can build out our post votes query. We can say post votes query, and this is going to be equal to query. The collection we want to query, pass this our Firestore instance, and the path to the collection that we're querying is going to be users / user.uid / postvotes. I'm going to save this so it formats. Then as the second argument to the query function, we can pass in that where function, and in this case, we want to say where the votes post ID is in the post IDs array that we just created. Then we can actually fetch these documents from the database. So we can say post vote docs is equal to await get docs and pass in our post votes query. Then we can create our post votes array and extract all of the data out of all of these docs. So you can say post vote docs dot map and map each document into a object with the ID of doc.id, as well as all of the data inside of doc.data. And now we just need to put these votes inside of our post vote state. So we can say set post state value and update our post votes to be post votes. And we can tell TypeScript this is going to be an array of post votes. So import that type from your post atom file and indicate that it's an array of post votes. So let's come back to our app here. So now we can see that the votes for these potential posts in the feed here are actually being fetched because it's indicating that I have voted on this post without calling this function. So if I comment this out here in our use effect and we don't call it, you can see that the votes are not being fetched. If I call it back in, they are. And kind of like what we were talking about before with building out the feed, if there was enough data being generated by the users, most of the time the content you're seeing in your feed is brand new and you have never seen it before, and you have likely not voted on it. And in our case, since we just don't have a lot of data in our demo here, we just have to build this to make it make sense because naturally, due to the lack of data, some of the posts that are showing up in our feed here are posts that we have seen and have voted on just because there is not enough data. And to prevent duplicate post votes from showing up in our post vote state, so say on the homepage, we go and fetch a bunch of votes for the post, and then if we go into a community, it's going to fetch the post votes for that community. There could be some overlap there. And to prevent that, we can, inside of this third use effect here that's calling our get user post votes, we can create what is called a cleanup function. So in React, when you return a callback function inside of a use effect, this function runs when this particular component dismounts. So in this case, our component is our index page. So inside of this use effect here, we can return a callback function, which will be triggered when we navigate away from the index page. Okay, and in React, this is what is known as a cleanup function because we typically use them to clean up our data and remove any sort of like stale data from our state. So inside of here, all we want to do is just clear our post votes. So if the user navigates to a community page, the post votes are sort of started off on a new clean slate. So we can say set post state value and simply just set our post votes to be an empty array, just like that. And this is typically what cleanup functions look like. So that is it for the entire functional part of this component. We have written out all of the required functions. All we need to do now is just create those right-hand side components. All right, guys, we are now going to start working on the top communities component here on the right-hand side of our home page. And it's a relatively straightforward component. All we are going to do is fetch the top 5 communities rated by number of members, and then we will display them to the user here and give them the functionality to join and leave these communities from right within here. Now on reddit.com, every time you visit the website, you see a different list of 5 communities here. Sometimes it's like top sports communities, sometimes it's top pet communities or something. It's always changing. And they have, again, advanced algorithms that are recommending you certain communities based on your interests and your user actions. Our simplified version of that is to always display the top communities and grab the top 5 communities rated by the number of members parameter stored on the community document. So let's go back to our app and create this. Okay, so let's go into our files here. And inside of our community folder, which is up here, I'm going to create a new file called recommendations.tsx. Okay, I'm going to close my directory so we have some more room, and I'm going to use the snippet. And we are not going to take in any props to this component, so we can remove that. So it's a pretty simple component. All we're going to have is a single function that is going to be responsible for fetching those top 5 communities. So we're going to call this getCommunityRecommendations. And it is going to be an asynchronous function. And we can create a try catch block inside of here as usual and log the error if it exists. I'm going to paste the function name in here because it is difficult for me to type. Also inside of this component, we are going to add a single use effect that we are going to give an empty dependency array so that it only runs a single time after the component mounts to the DOM. And when the component mounts to the DOM, we want to just call that getCommunityRecommendations function. Okay, and at the top of this component here, I'm going to create 2 pieces of state. And the first one is going to be the actual communities array, where we are going to store the top community documents from the database. So we can say communities and set communities is equal to use state, and we can initialize this as an empty array. And we can indicate the type of items inside of this array by importing our communities type from our community atom file, and indicate that it is an array of community items. And I'm also going to create some loading state inside of here so we can display a nice skeleton loader to the user, which is just going to be a simple skeleton, and we're going to initialize loading as false. And also inside of this component, we are going to need our use community data hook, so we can call that in here. And what we're going to need is the community state value as well as the on, join, or leave community function, because we are allowing the user to join or leave communities from right within this component. So we need that function in here. All right, so let's build out this function. So at the top here, I'm going to set loading state to be true. And at the very bottom, we can set loading to be false. Okay. Then inside of our try block, we can just build a simple query that is going to grab the top 5 communities ordered by the number of members parameter. So we can say const community query is equal to query, import the queries function from Firestore, create a collection reference to the collection we want to query, pass collection our Firestore instance, and the name of the collection is going to be communities. And as a second argument, we can pass in our order by function, and we want to indicate that we want to order by the number of members key, and we want them in descending order so that the most popular is at the top. And then we can also just pass in a limit of 5 because we are only displaying the top 5. Okay, so let's actually grab these documents from the database. So we can say const community docs is equal to await get docs, pass in our communities query, and then extract all of the data from each of these documents. We can create a communities array and say community docs.docs.map and map each document into a JavaScript object with the ID of doc.id. I feel like I've said this so many times because we've done this 100 times. Doc.id and the data from inside of the document. So spread doc.data, just like this. Okay, and then what we can do is just set our communities array state to be the value of this communities array that we just created here. So we can say set communities to be communities, and we can indicate to TypeScript that this is going to be indeed an array of community, just like this. And this community state in this component is local here because we don't really need it at a global level. So it makes sense to just have it local to the component because that's really all where we need it. Awesome. And that is it for this function. And all that is left is to build out the actual HTML of this component here. Okay. And if we look at our demo here, there is an image at the top of this component here. And this is an external image that we are getting from this images folder inside of our public folder here. And I think very back in the early stages of this project, I recommended you guys to grab all of these images off of my GitHub and put them in here. But if you did not grab all of them, the one we're going to be needing here is recom's art. And we're also going to be needing this one down here, this kind of like spaceship one. And I think that is Reddit personal home. So these are the two we are going to need, recom's art and Reddit personal home. So please ensure that you grab those off my GitHub and put them inside of your images folder in your public folder. Okay, so I'm going to close this, close the directory. Let's go back to our app here and let's get rid of this div. And the overall container is going to be a flex container. And inside of this flex container, we're going to have 2 more children flex containers, one for the sort of header part, which is that top communities image thing I was just talking about. And then the other flex is going to be the container of all of the communities here. Okay, so let's go back here and let's add the styles for the outermost flex container. Okay, so this is going to have a direction of column. And we're going to give it a background of white, a border radius of 4. We're going to add a border 1 pixel solid and a border color of gray 300. Now let's work on this header component here, this first flex child. Okay, so the header component is going to have an align value of flex end because we want the text to appear at the bottom of the container. Okay, we're going to make the text color white. We're going to give this padding of 6 pixels top bottom, 10 pixels left and right. We're going to make the height 70 pixels. The border radius is going to take 4 inputs, and it's going to be 4 pixels, 4 pixels, 0 pixels, 0 pixels. Save this so it formats a little bit nicer. I'm going to give this a font weight of 700. Okay, and this is where we're going to place our image in here. So we're going to say background image, and we are going to use that image I was just talking about in the images folder, and we can access it via the URL function through CSS. And inside of here, we can pass in the path to that image. So it's /images/recom's art.png, just like this. Okay, and then we're going to add a background size that is going to be equal to cover so that the image fits the entire container. And then all that's going to be inside of our header here is going to be the text top communities, just like this. Okay, now let's go back to our index page and actually bring this in so we can see what we're doing. So where this comment is in our right-hand side fragment, let's bring that in so we can say recommendations. Perfect. And I think I just have to refresh because my hot reload thing is kind of frozen or something. Okay, so we're not seeing that image for some reason. Oh, I'm missing images here. This is images. There we go. And to make it so that we can actually see that top communities text a little bit better, I'm going to place this sort of like black overlay, filtery, blurry type thing over the image just so it makes that white text pop a little bit more. Okay, so what we're going to do is add a background gradient here. And this is kind of a long string here, so I'm just going to paste this in from my demo. And it's basically just a linear gradient, basically just that sort of black overlay with some like light opacity so that it's sort of see-through, and it just sort of makes the white text pop a little bit more. Okay, and that is it for this top communities header component here. Okay, so let's move on to the actual communities list part of this component here. So we're going to give this a direction of column as well, column. And inside of here, we are going to also add a skeleton loader. So I'm going to add the ternary operator loading. If we are loading, we are going to display a skeleton component that I'm going to paste in from my project here. It's about 15 lines or something. It's just like a stack, just like this. And I'm going to add all of these missing imports. Okay, and if we are not loading, we actually want to display those top communities. Okay, so inside of here, I'm going to create a React fragment so that we can add some JavaScript. We want to iterate through all of the communities. So we can say communities.map, and for each one, we're going to return one of those list items. And in each of these list items, we need to know if this user has joined this community or not, because we need to toggle the display of this button to make it say joined or join and to make it blue or white. And so to do that for each one, on each map iteration inside of communities.map, we can create an isJoined variable and do the exact same thing we did in our community header to determine if the user is in this community. So we can just say community state value dot my snippets and try to find a snippet in here with the community ID that matches this particular item's ID. Okay, so we can take each snippet and check if its community ID is equal to the item.id. An item is the current community that we are iterating through here. Okay, and then I'm just going to Booleanize this and add the double bang operator here. And then underneath here is where we can actually return the HTML for the community item list component here. Okay, so let's go back to our app here. All right, so the outermost container of this component here is going to be a next link because we're going to make these clickable and direct the user to that community if the user does click on it. Okay, so we can bring in our link component from next link. And to satisfy React's requirements when mapping through a list of items, we need to pass this a key. So we can give this a key of item.id. And the href prop of our link is going to be the string that is /r/ then item.id. So that's like the community ID. Okay, and inside of the link, we're going to have a flex container here. And this container is going to have an align of center, so everything is vertically centered. We're going to give this a font size of 10 point, a border bottom property of 1 pixel solid, and a border color of gray 200. And we want to give this padding of 10 pixels top bottom, 12 pixels right left. Okay, so we can save this. Okay, then inside of here, we're going to have another flex container. And we're going to give this one a width of 80%. And also an align of center. Then inside of here, we're going to have another flex container that is going to contain the actual number here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and where we can get that number from is by, in the map function, we can take advantage of the fact that JavaScript also gives us access to the index of the current item we are iterating through. And so down here inside of this flex container, we can add some text, and that text is going to be the index plus 1, because we did not want to display 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to display 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we need to import text from Chakra, which it does not auto-import. Good old text. Okay, so if I save this, okay, let's go back to our app here. We can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 thing there. In the flex container of this text, we're going to give a width of 15% here. Now, as a sibling to this flex container with a width of 15%, we're going to create another flex container, and this is going to be the parent of the community name as well as the image or the icon if there is no image. Okay, so we're going to give this an align of center as well as a width of 80%. Then inside of here, we can add our famous image URL ternary operator. We want to check if the item has an image URL, and if it does, we want to display that image. And if it does not, we're going to display our famous Reddit icon. So let's do the image here. So let's bring in image from Chakra. And we want to pass a source value that is going to be equal to item.imageURL. We want to make the border radius equal to full to make it round, as well as a box size of 28 pixels. And we can give this some margin right of 2 to add some space between the image and the community name. Okay, and if there is no image URL, we want to display an icon, and that icon is going to be our FA Reddit icon. So make sure that imports from React icon /FA. We want to make this a bit bigger, so we can give it a font size of 30 and a color of brand 100, our good old Reddit orange, brand 100, and a margin right of 2. Perfect. Okay, so we can see those showing up over there. Now, underneath this ternary operator here, I'm going to create a span element where we're going to display the actual community ID. Okay, and the reason I'm creating a span is because we need to apply some CSS to the text name so that if it's super long, it has like the triple ellipses, like the ... so the text doesn't overflow, because that's how they do it on Reddit. And that styling wasn't working on like the flex container component from Chakra, so I'm just using a span, and it seemed to work on there. So for this, we just need to add some inline styling, and the styling is going to be white space, which is going to be no wrap, and we're going to add overflow, which is going to be hidden, and we're going to give text overflow to be ellipses, just like this. So if the community name is super long, it's just going to show the triple dots, which looks pretty nice. Let's go back to our app here, and inside of here, all we need to do is display the text that is going to be r/ then item.id, which is the community name. So if I save this now, we can see those names show up here. And so yeah, you can see the triple ellipses here for this one with the longer name. Now, all we are missing for each of these list items is just the button that the user can actually click to join or leave the community. So 2 flex containers down from the span component we just created, I'm going to create a box, which is going to wrap our button component. And inside of here, we're going to add our button. Okay, let's scroll up a bit. Okay, so we can give this button a height of 22 pixels, a font size of 8 point. Then we can add the variant property, and we can make this dynamic depending on if the user is or isn't joined in this community. So we can use our isJoined boolean that we just created up top, and we can say if they are joined, we want the variant to be outline, and if they are not, we want it to be solid. And whoops, I did not mean to make this button self-closing. We do need a closing tag in here. And the text we want to display inside of our button is also going to be dynamic depending on that isJoined parameter. So we can create another ternary operator. If they are joined, we want to display the text joined. If they are not, we want to display join. Awesome. So we can see that showing up over here. And then we just need to add the onClick to this button to actually call our join or leave community function. And inside of here, I'm going to take the click event that is generated and create a function that I'm going to call event.stopPropagation so that we do not trigger the Next.js link when we try to click on this button. Okay, then right after that, we can call our onJoinOrLeaveCommunity function and pass in our item because that is of type community, as well as the isJoined boolean parameter because that is what that function requires. Perfect. So now this should be clickable, and I should be able to leave and join these communities right from inside of this component. So how cool is that? Okay, so one very subtle thing you'll notice is that the logo and the text kind of move over very slightly depending on the size of this button because there's only so much room in this container. And so when this button is a little bit larger, the text and the logo move over. And we don't want that to happen because it looks kind of weird and we want it to be in the exact same spot all the time. So the way we can fix this is on our box component here, we can add absolute positioning. So we can say position is equal to absolute, and we can position these buttons to be 10 pixels from the right of the parent container. So if I save this, it's going to look kind of weird. We just need to go up to this flex container that is the first child of our Next.js link and add a position of relative. Now that absolute position button knows that it is positioned relative to its parent, which is this Flex container here. Awesome. So now when this button grows, it's not going to change the position of that text because it's using absolute positioning. It is no longer technically taking up any space in that container, even though it appears that way. And so the very last thing we need to add to our recommendations component is just the view all button at the very bottom there. So let's quickly do that. So below all of our list items here in the communities.map function, just underneath there, but inside of this fragment here, we want to add a box component. And this box is going to contain that button that says view all. So we save this. Then on this box, we want to give it some padding, and the padding is going to be 10 pixels top bottom, 20 pixels left and right. And then for our button here, we're going to give this a height of 30 pixels and a width of 100%. And this button isn't going to do anything. It is for decoration only, but this would be a cool feature for you to add to maybe take you to some community recommendation or community discovery page where users could see a more extensive list of communities that they could potentially join. Awesome. So we are now completely done our top communities component, and we can just add in those other two decorative components on the right-hand side here. So let's go and do that. Okay, and I'm just going to paste in the code for both of these components because they're very simple. They're only about 20 lines each, and they don't really have any functionality. They're just for decoration only. So inside of our community folder, I'm going to create another file called premium.tsx, and this is going to be this component here that is recommending you to try Reddit Premium. Okay, and I'm just going to paste in the code for this component. Here it is here. I will put the links to these components in the description so you do have immediate access and you can just throw them into your project. And then the other component I'm going to create is going to be called personalhome.tsx, and that is going to be this one here. Paste this one in. It's a slightly longer, but nothing super crazy. It's only 45 lines. And again, this uses that Reddit personal home image from the images folder. So do make sure that you do have this to make sure it works on your end. And that is it for these decorative components. So we can close both of these, and I can close my directory here. And inside of our index page, we can come back and bring both of those in. So just underneath recommendations, we can bring in our premium component. And underneath that, we can bring in the personal home component. So now if I save this and go back to the app, so you can see these showing up here, but they are not spaced out very good here. So what I'm going to do is actually change the fragment to be a stack. And then we can add in some spacing here, and this spacing is going to be 5. Awesome, so they're spaced out much better now, and this looks really, really good. And actually, a really good exercise for you to do on this personal home component here would be to actually make those buttons do something functional. For example, the create post button, you could trigger the opening of this directory up here, maybe scroll the user to the top of the page and open that up. And then for the create community button, you could open up the create community modal. So I will leave that up to you if you decide to do that. All right, you guys, it is now time for deployment. We are now ready to actually get our application into production. And I've decided that we're going to be using Vercel for our deployment. For those of you that don't know, Vercel is the company that created Next.js, and they're making deploying Next apps extremely easy. All we have to do is just with a click of a button, we can connect the Git repository that our project is hosted on to a Vercel project. And every time we make changes to the master or main branch of the project, it will automatically deploy those changes, and we can track the build and everything on Vercel. It's super easy, and we're going to see that in just a few minutes. All right, so for deployment, if you have not done so yet, you are going to need to create a GitHub repository for your project here and put all of your code on GitHub, because like I mentioned, we are going to connect this repository to our newly created Vercel project that we're going to create right now. All right, so before you move forward with Vercel, make sure you do have a repository created on GitHub and all of your code is on there. And I actually do have changes that I need to commit here for our new index page that I need to push to my main branch before we do this as well. Okay, so I'm just going to commit this, and I'm going to say complete index page. I will push this to GitHub. Perfect. Okay, so now all of my latest code should be on GitHub. Yeah, so it's saying just right now it received that commit. So we should be good to go with the deployment. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to vercel.com. Okay, and I already have some projects created here. This is the demo over here. So what you're going to want to do is create an account if you do not have one. And once you are logged in, you'll see some like sort of dashboard where all of your projects are, and there will be some sort of button where you can create a new project. And this is where we're actually going to connect our repository. With a single click of a button, you can connect any one of your GitHub repositories and get it ready for deployment. So Vercel makes it extremely easy to deploy Next.js apps. Okay, so this is the project here, Reddit clone tutorial. This was the repo we were just looking at. And so I'm going to click on import. And it's going to ask you for a project name. I usually just leave it the same as the repo name. And then the framework preset, so we're using Next.js, and then the root directory we can just leave as this index route here. And then there's some things in here like the build and output settings. We're not going to touch this. And then there are environment variables, which we are going to need to add because if you recall, if you go to our .env local file, we have all of these environment variables for our application to connect to our Firebase project. So in order for our production application to connect to our Firebase project, we are going to need to add all of these environment variables into our production environment. And this is where we are going to do that. And these can, of course, be modified, and you can add more ones and remove ones and edit ones after you do deploy the project. So don't worry if you forget some of them or some of them are wrong or anything. You can always change this after your initial deployment. And we may have to deploy a few times because it might fail the first few times. It usually happens. The build will fail and you have to go find something in your code, re-push to GitHub to trigger a new build. And then usually after a few times, it will work. So we're going to walk through that process together. Okay, so what we're going to do is add all of these environment variables to our Next.js project. So what we're going to do is copy all of these names here and place them inside of the name part of the environment variable and then place the value inside of the value. So let's do the first one here. So next public Firebase API key. So I'm going to paste this in here. Then as the value, I'm going to grab the value. Paste that in and just click add. Perfect. So once all 6 of these Firebase environment variables have been added, go ahead and click on deploy and we can see what is going to happen. So what's going to happen here is the deployment is going to be queued and it's going to start building the application to attempt to take all of your code, package it together into a production bundle, and then deploy that production bundle. And again, as I mentioned, this might fail the first few times due to some sort of, any sort of TypeScript errors or type compiler errors. Really anything can trigger a build error. So we are going to see that and we'll walk through any debugging that might need to happen. Okay, so we can go back to our homepage here while that's building and we'll see our new project here and we can just go into this. This is kind of the actual dashboard of this project and we can track everything. You can see the build logs in case something does fail. There's the deployments you have in here. And so we can see there already was an error in the build. So let's go take a look at that. So we can go to view build logs. So it says, build failed. So now we can take a look at these logs here and see what errors it came across. Okay, so cannot find module Firebase functions or corresponding type declarations. Okay, and it tells you what file this is in and everything. So it makes it super convenient to debug. So if we go to our functions file in here, it's saying that it cannot find the module Firebase functions or the corresponding type declarations. Okay, I actually don't think I've come across this one before. When I deployed the initial project, I don't think I came across this, but let's see here. Firebase functions. Okay, so for some reason, I do not have Firebase functions installed. I thought it would have installed when I enabled Cloud Functions, but I'm not sure exactly what happened. I don't remember having to manually install it in our demo, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm just going to Firebase functions. Maybe I did have to manually install this. Okay, so I'm just going to manually install this in our project here, npmi Firebase functions. So having failed deployments is super common, and it happens a lot. So don't be alarmed if your project fails to build. It is very, very common, and oftentimes you have to try several times to get it to work. There's always stuff you miss and things that just make it fail unexpectedly. Okay, so let's go back to Vercel here. And so that was the first error that it came across. So basically how Vercel works is every time you push changes to the main branch or the master branch of your project, it's automatically going to trigger a rebuild. And so all we have to do here is push this new code that we just have, which is the installation of Firebase functions, to our main branch. So let's commit this. We can say install Firebase functions. And if I actually push this to my main branch, okay, so now the code is on GitHub. If I go back to my Vercel home here, we can see that it says just now via GitHub, and that commit is already there. and it will have triggered a new build. So the building is again in progress. So let's go view build logs and see what happens this time. Okay, so it failed again. So let's take a look at what happened this time here. Okay, there's a few errors here. Okay, so the first one is React hook use effect is called conditionally. React hooks must be called. Okay, so let's go to our index page for our community. Okay, so the reason this is saying that this use effect is called conditionally is talking about this one here, and that is because it is below this if statement here. So if this triggers, this is actually not going to run. And that's not allowed. In React, your hooks need to run the exact same amount of times. Every single render, they can't be conditionally called. So to fix this, all we have to do is move this down here below to the very bottom. And then if we save that, that should solve this one here. Okay, so the next one is saying that quotation, single quote cannot be, can be escaped with. Okay, so instead of our reset password, it's saying on line 33, tells you the line and everything, which is super nice. Okay, so I think it has to do with this text here, this this apostrophe inside of the wheel, send you a reset link. So I think all we have to do to fix this is we could change this to like we will, or I think we could wrap this in a template literal string like this to make it JavaScript. And that should solve that. We will see. I think that should work. And then this one down here is it's saying, do not pass children as props. Instead, nest the children between. Okay, so if we go to our search input, it's talking about line 16. Okay, so I think that's this one here. Okay, so rather than, I guess, passing this search icon as a children prop to the input left element, what we can do to do basically the exact same thing is remove the self-closing tag on this input left element here and create an actual closing tag. And then we can take this search icon component and place it inside of here like this, delete the child, and this should do exactly the same thing because now this is acting as the child or children of the input left element. Okay, so now if we go back to our app, yeah, it does appear the exact same. However, now it's more, I guess, proper for React. So I guess Chakra has to update their documentation to reflect that as well, because I think we just grabbed this off of Chakra. But okay, so let's go back to Vercel here, and I think that was it. So yeah, we have the escape one, children as props, and the use effect. Okay, so I think that's it. So what I'm going to do is commit these changes. We can say fix build errors and push those to GitHub. Some of you, by the way, might be using your terminal to push these changes to GitHub. I'm just using the GitHub source control in the left here. I just find it super easy. Cool. Okay, so this should trigger a rebuild. So let's go to, so let's refresh this project here. Okay, so fix build errors, it's there, and it is building. So let's go ahead and view the build logs and see how far it makes it this time. Okay, so it looked like my build succeeded. We can see the check mark here. So it's pretty quick. It only took just over a minute, 1 minute and 22 seconds. So now we can actually visit this, and this is the real app here. This is it in production. It's deployed at this Vercel domain sort of given to you, and you can connect a custom domain to your project through Vercel. There should be a domains section inside of the project. Where is that? I think if you go to, oh yeah, view domains. So say you wanted to put like redditproject.com or something, any sort of domain, you would add that in here and Vercel would connect that for you to your production build. In our case, I'm just going to leave it as the assigned one by Vercel, but this is pretty cool. We have a securely deployed application that is now officially on the internet and it's connected to our Firebase project. So this is in production. So that's super cool. It's officially deployed. And we can log in and everything. So I'm going to log in as my Shad Merhi user. And very cool. We are now able to actually use this application in production. This is actually on the internet. We are on the internet. Comment. Very, very cool. You can delete everything. The app should function exactly as it was in development. Awesome. All right, you guys. So the very last thing that we are going to cover here is going to be Firebase security rules, because now that our application is in production, we want to add some security rules to our database to only allow certain types of users or authenticated users to access certain resources in our database, such as posts, comments. So the way we can implement security rules is we can go to our Firebase project here, and inside of the Firestore Database tab, we can navigate to the rules section, which we have briefly seen before, and we're actually going to write out some rules for our specific documents in our database. Okay, and security rules are really important because even though our front end, if we go to our app, okay, so only the owners of posts can see the front end action icons here, like deleting the icon, etc., or only admins can change the community image of the community. But technically, you can still make a request to the backend using the command line, like making a curl request or something, and the request to your app and to your database may not necessarily be coming directly from your actual front-end application. It might be coming from some other source like a curl command. And so for that reason, it is important to protect your database and all of the data inside of your security rules against these types of potentially malicious requests made from outside of your application. So now your front end and your back end will both be nice and secure. Okay, so I'm just going to expand this out a bit so we can see this here. So essentially, this is the default security rules that you're given for a new Firebase project. And so right now, there's only one rule that exists. It's basically allowing every single type of action on our database, which is perfect for development because we need to test out all of the features. So basically, this thing here, the document equals, and then the double star thing, is just a wildcard that is the path to every single document in our database. So it's the posts, the users, and everything in here, every possible path. That is what this document thing represents. It's basically just saying allow read and write in all cases. That's essentially what this means. And so we can write paths to our specific resources like our posts and comments to only allow read and write on updates and deletions to each type of resource. Okay, awesome. So let's remove this here and let's write out our first security rule. And once we write the first one, the rest should be pretty intuitive. So we can delete this here. And the first one is going to be our users collection. So to do that, we can use the match keyword here, and we want to write the path to the particular resource we are creating the security rule for. In this case, it is going to be our users collection, and the second part of the path is going to be our user ID. So this curly bracket notation here just indicates that this is a dynamic path and that we are referring to essentially any document inside of the users collection with any particular ID. And on any specific user document, we have those two sub-collections, community snippets, as well as post votes. And for both of those, they're going to have the same security rules. And so to indicate that we want to refer to all of the sub-collections on any particular user document, we can use the wildcard parameter rest of path and set it equal to the double star. And this was similar to the double star we saw before. And this is basically just saying that at any path inside of any particular user document, so any sub-collection and any document inside of any of those sub-collections, that is what this is referring to here. So we can create specific rules for those. And in this case, this is going to be the community snippet sub-collection as well as the post votes sub-collection and any document inside of either of those. Okay, so then we can open up some curly brackets here. And this is where we're actually going to write the permissions. Okay, so for these particular resources, we're going to say allow read and write, and then we can add a colon here. And then basically we just want to write some sort of if statement that is going to say allow this if some condition is true. So in our case, we want to only allow reading and writing to these particular paths if the request.auth instance is not null, which means that the user is logged in because we can access that current user via this .auth instance because it's connected to our authentication service. Okay, and we also want to add the condition that the user ID, which is coming from this path here, so whatever we name this in the wildcard path, we can use as a variable inside of this logic here. So if I name this user ID lol, down here, this would be user ID lol. It's basically the same as like a dynamic path in Next.js. Whatever we name the dynamic path, we have access to that variable name inside of the logic here. Let's change this back to user ID. Okay, so we want to see that the user ID is equal to the requests.auth instance.uid. So we're saying, okay, so the user must be logged in. So the request.auth instance is not null, and the user ID of the authenticated user matches the user ID of the actual user document that they're trying to write to. So only Shad Merhi can write to the Shad Merhi user document. Shad Merhi cannot write to the Ben document or whoever document. Awesome. And so that is it for our users collection. So we can come down here and start working on the other ones. So the next one we're going to do is our posts. So we're going to say match/posts, and we are going to again use our wildcard post ID variable here. And for our posts, we are going to make them completely public because all of our communities are public. On reddit.com, there are private communities and stuff which would require more advanced security rules. But in our case, we are making all of our communities public. So all of the post data is available to read to anyone for reading. So we can just simply say allow read, and we do not need to specify a rule, which means that this is going to be readable under all circumstances. But we want to add a condition for writing a post. So for actually creating a post and storing one in the database, we want to add some condition for that. And in this case, we only want to allow the creation of posts if the post creator ID matches the ID of the authenticated user, because we don't want Shadi creating posts on behalf of Ben, or Ben creating posts on behalf of Shadi. So we want to make sure that it is Shadi creating a post for Shadi's user. So to do that, we can say request.resource, and request.resource is how we can access the actual document object that we are trying to write to the database. Okay, and then we can access the data of that resource. And our data, if you remember, has a parameter called creator ID on it. Because if we go to our new post form here, this is going to be the request.resource.data object. And so on here, we have access to the creator ID. So we want to check that the resource's creator ID is equal to the auth instance's user ID. And the next rule that we want to add for our posts is for the deletion of posts, because we only want Shadi to be able to delete Shadi's posts. We don't want Ben to be able to delete Shadi's posts. So what we can do is we can add a rule for deleting. So we can say allow delete. And we only want to allow the deletion of posts if the user making the request, so request.auth.uid, is equal to the creator ID of the post resource that they are trying to delete. And the way we can access this resource is we can say resource.data.creator ID. So in the case of creating a post, when we are actually like writing a document to the database and we are passing data with our request, we access that data through request.resource.data. In this case, we're accessing a resource that is already inside of our database, so it's not coming from a request. So we can access that just through that resource object here. I'm just going to change the order of this first one here to match the bottom one. Doesn't really matter, but just a preference of mine. So let's say like that. And the very last CRUD operation we could add a rule for would be for updating the post. And in our case, our application is not built to allow editing of posts, but if you decide to build that in this project or a future project, this is how you would write a rule specific to updating this resource. So now we can work on our comments. So we can say match comments, use our comment ID wildcard variable. And the rules for this are going to be the exact same as the posts. They're going to be publicly readable, but only the owners can create and delete these resources. And the very last type of resource in our database are the community documents. So we can say /communities and use our community ID wildcard. Cool. And so for communities, all authenticated users can create communities. So we can just say allow read, they are publicly readable, but for writing, we just want to make sure that the user is authenticated. So we can say request.auth does not equal null. Just like that. I'm just missing an if statement here. Awesome. So now if I publish these rules, they will actually be published to the Firebase servers where our application is currently deployed. And they might take a minute to propagate to all those servers. But now if I go back to the application, these should be in effect. And depending on the functionality and the types of features and security you have built into your app, you can add more security rules and you can have more advanced user-based authentication. But in our case, this is exactly what we need for our application. Perfect. And that is it for our security rules. And now our database is nice and secure, and only the appropriate users can access the data that is available to them. All right, you guys. So believe it or not, that is the end of the entire Reddit build. I cannot believe we made it here. It has been a wild journey. Congratulations if you have made it to the end here. I hope you have learned an insane amount. We have covered so many things here, and my entire goal with this project was to cover enough stuff in detail to give you the tools necessary to create anything you would want with these technologies. So I hope you have gained that from this, and I really hope that you feel that your skills have been upgraded in following this tutorial. And if you have enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. It really does help out my channel, and I'm going to be creating more and more tutorials in the future. This is just the beginning. And also, please join our Discord. It is a growing community, and it is not only for this project. Just join in there to chat really about anything. It could be about this project, it could be about your own projects, and it could just be this ongoing thing, and chat about really any future project. All right, so thank you guys once again so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. It has been a crazy journey. I hope you have learned a lot. So thank you guys so much once again, and I will see you next time.